Alright, what is up guys? So as I've mentioned in a couple other videos, I've been experimenting around with a lot of the more competitive strategies that I have access to just in my card pool, which is becoming a little bit more complicated now that power creep is starting to kind of get away from me with new product releases, because I don't have the adventure package, and now all of the Therion cards and Punk cards are being splashed so easily in so many different deck types. It is getting a little bit harder to keep up. That being said, a lot of the decks I've tried that are kind of more from last year have been pretty successful, and this is a deck that I know people are just incredibly sick of seeing, and it has memes around it, and it's been talked about to death, but I never got to appreciate this deck when it's in its prime, or really play it at all. I've been sitting on pretty much a full Invoked core since Fusion Enforcers first came out in 2017, and never really got to play with it at all. So I am really looking forward to being able to play it a little bit more, even now that it's been, memed to death and people are sick of seeing it. I had a lot of fun with this deck. I actually did really well with it as well. I had a great record. I only lost against Adventure Punk Dragon Link deck, which is just a crazy deck that seemed nearly unbeatable, and the guy playing it was an excellent player who's been playing forever. I've seen him around my local area for years. But a lot of the other matchups were pretty easy. I was expecting to run into a lot more branded, and people were talking about, oh, you don't want to use this deck against branded because you don't want to be using things like Maximus and sending their extra deck to the graveyard because they're going to get value off of that. But I never actually saw that come up. It actually performed really, really well. So let's go ahead and get into this Invoked Dogmatika deck. So I will say that I'm not going to be cynical towards these cards, but there are some things that are, frankly, at this point so self-evident that they don't really bear explaining. So we may go a little quickly through some of the cards here. So 3 Alistair, as I'm sure you guys are used to. 100% standard. 3 Ecclesia, I think, is standard as well now. Part of that, I think, is Nadir Servant getting semi-limited. I actually have 2 Altis, and then I've got the Secret and the Ultra. People hate that I have these mixed match rarities, but I wanted to keep one of the Altis in the collection binder. And I also have a Starlight one, which I will never take out of its protective casing. But great card. The immunity from battle protection is actually fantastic, and that actually came up in one situation where a guy had a full board, he was ready to OTK me, but he actually couldn't get over this, and so he had to pass it back to me where I was able to make a comeback. So yeah, the battle protection is actually really important with that. I'm on 2 Maximus. I think this card is crazy against a lot of different matchups where they are combo heavy decks that value all of their cards in their extra deck. And then what I would typically do with the normal summon Alistair, make Almirage make Secure Gardener combo, is even if, let's say I didn't open Meltdown, but I opened Alistair, and they ash the Alistair, even if I turn that Alistair into Secure Gardener, I can banish the Almirage for this guy, and then actually start making some plays, because I can still send the App Cologne and the Titan Clad to the graveyard to search more cards and get more value and really set up my board. So I think that Maximus is absolutely critical to that, and I wouldn't play it at any fewer than 2, but I wouldn't play it any more either. And then, of course, the 1 Fleur de Lis. I messed up a couple times and didn't search this when I needed to, but when it did come up, it was really good. I noticed, actually, that this was included in the Albaz Strike structure deck, but what's really funny about that is you actually can't resolve this effect within the sealed structure deck, because unless you were playing like multiple of the structure decks combined and you hard like tribute summon this, then you could activate its effect, but you have to control a Dogmatika to be able to do this against an opponent's monster that's summoned from the extra deck. So it's kind of specific, but luckily those are situations that come up almost all the time. So it's technically just a free searchable monster negate with a body that also boosts your guys, which is pretty cool. And so I really like that about it. Also, I think from a lore standpoint, is it true, if anybody knows the lore, is it true that this is just the same person as Ira Sword Soul? Because I'm pretty sure it is. So I do actually have some Shadal bodies in here, just 3, and I'm actually thinking about cutting the Squamata, because all it would do is if I just happened to hard draw it, and I was trying to make the Winda or the Construct, then I would be able to proc one of these other 2 effects off of sending it to the graveyard, and that seemed pretty good. The Beast is pretty self-explanatory because you get to draw off of sending it, so usually if I have to hard make Construct, then getting a draw is huge off of that. And then Aerial comes up in so many matchups as a pretty powerful just blowout to banish 3 cards out of your opponent's graveyard. So this is a pretty necessary inclusion. But if I had to cut one, I'd probably cut the Squamata because it wasn't really doing anything for me. They don't really take too much space, and you don't really brick on them either. It actually ends up being pretty consistent. And the rest of the monsters are hand traps, as you expected. So this is what I went with, and a lot of people were kind of questioning these, but these are my favorite hand traps right now, and the rest are in the side. It's been pretty standard with every deck I've been playing recently. So it's 3 Ash, 3 Ogre, 2 Bell actually, but I've also got 3 Imperm. So you have more hand traps in here than any other deck I've been playing recently, and I've been saying that you need to allocate like at least 3 play sets of hand traps in every deck that you're playing, and this one has technically 11 hand traps. It probably could have even more than that, honestly. Maybe if I cut the other Shadal cards, I could fit like some DD Crows or something in there, or some Veilers. But yeah, those all came up a lot. They were pretty good, but I would side them out for the appropriate matchups. So onto the spells. Of course, we have the 3 Meltdown, which is one of the things people forget about, is that technically, due to this card's text, you can prevent your opponent from responding to Schism, which is huge, because Schism's non-targeting send to graveyard type of removal is very strong. We've got the 2 Invocation, which is standard. I do actually have a third, but I remembered that it's suboptimal to really play more than 2. 2 is the correct number always. And then 2 Nadir Servant. Again, it was semi-limited. It's a very powerful card, which of course you got to remember it's pretty huge drawback. So if for any reason I can't get to Maximus, this is going to help me get off to the races as far as searching whatever I'm missing, I'm missing the Ecclesia, if I'm missing the Maximus, if I'm missing the Fleur-de-Lis, and if I'm missing the Schism, sending the Apcalone, it really just lets me access any part of the deck. I just have to remember to do it after I've done the sort of invoked combo in a vacuum, and that's kind of why these 2 engines work together, is because the invoked thing is so self-contained that you can get around the drawbacks of the Dogmatika cards. So the last spells is 1 Terraforming to search the Meltdown, and 1 Called by the Grave, which actually came up quite a bit. You wouldn't think you'd play this in like a non-combo deck, but the card is so versatile. It's great in decks that play aggressively and decks that play defensively. Onto the traps, which is where my build is actually interesting, and it departs a little bit from what I think is the mainstream as far as this deck goes, and really the only part that I think is really interesting. We'll kind of get into it, but of course we've got the Punishment, which is a really good card. If you send like Intis with this, you get 2 pops for the price of 1, which is great. The 1 Schism, which is an insanely broken card, and is just honestly kind of unfair. This was my only out. I played 2 Dragon Link players. This was my only out to Boral End, the non-targeting send to graveyard. I had to eat both of their interruptions because he had Savage and he had Boral End, and I had to make sure both of those negates had fired before I fired this. And then I made like Winda and sent the Boral End to graveyard. There was also an interesting interaction where one of my Dragon Link opponents tried to chain quick launch to this to summon out Rocket Tracer in response to it. And he initially had a clear board, but I shotgunned this because I knew I needed a floodgate against Dragon Link. And when it resolved, the Striker Dragon hit the field and just went straight to graveyard because I now had a dark monster on the field to target with, which was really funny. So I mentioned the 3 Imperm already. These were really good, as they always are. But here's where I got a little bit experimental. So this most of the credit for this comes from the YCS topping striker list. But I decided to main a play set of Trap Trick and D-Barrier. And so this was my answer to Sword Soul and Despia / Branded, and it was great. But I didn't face any Sword Soul yesterday. And like I said, the Branded I faced, it never really came up that much. But this was crazy because I could Trap Trick for an Imperm and then fire that Imperm to negate something like Borderland Savage, or at least get my opponent to trigger that negate, and then start playing through some of their stuff. So it's just easy access. It pivots into one of these 2 normal traps, which is huge. And so even if you're going first, and you find out that D-Barrier is suboptimal against the deck you're playing against, like one of my matchups was Plunder Patrol, which was super random, and Plunder Patrol plays Links, Synchros, and Xyz, so I didn't really know which one to hit. And so I didn't have an opportunity really to fire this and stop him at all. So I was like, whatever, we'll tractor for the Imperm, and then he'll have another negate live, which I think is pretty good. So this was great. I don't think I would change this. Maybe if the format changed a little bit and D-Barrier wasn't as good, we wouldn't do this. But just having, like, in theory, 3 more copies of Imperm was also just really, really good. So I don't think I would change that. That was actually fantastic. The extra deck is pretty much card for card the consensus for what this deck should be playing, so as a result it's a little bit boring, but we will talk about it. Of course, we got the Almirage, the Secure Gardna, which is just to get a Link monster body in the graveyard to banish for Maximus, and then to have a light monster for the Invocation. We have the Selene access code line, so this was Verte and DPE before Verte got banned. And because all the Dogmatika monsters are spellcasters, if you make a good board turn 1 and then on turn 2 you're not locked out of your extra deck at the beginning of the turn, you can link those Dogmatika monsters into Selene and then make access code. Interestingly, against the Plunder player, this would have been game against him in game 2, but he actually used the effect, I think, of the Xyz Plunder Patrol ship, I'm not sure which one, and banished Selene before I could rank it up into access code. So that was a little unfortunate, but well played on his part. We've got the Titanclad, which will usually search the Fleur-de-Lis at the end of your combo. We've got 2 Intis for popping cards, which is insanely good because it's interesting that they gave the Dogmatika monsters like... So Fleur-de-Lis tops out at 25, which is super interesting because Nadir's Servant will always be able to send this card to access any one of your Dogmatika monsters. I almost feel like that was intentional synergy built in with the Dogmatika monsters, as they knew the cards you were going to have to send from extra deck to grave couldn't have more attack than, or couldn't have less attack or more attack than what you were trying to search. They wanted it to be right around the same. So these interestingly have 25, which I think is actually pretty synergistic. I've got the Fossil Warrior Skull Knight, which came up actually where I needed another activation of Maximus, but I didn't want the pop to trigger immediately. It sat in the graveyard for a turn, and then I triggered it next turn, so that was actually pretty good. Glad that card got reprinted. Holy crap. We play 3 Chanel monsters, as you probably already heard me mention by now. So the App Cologne is only for the search of the Schism. The Winda is the Floodgate that everybody hates and cannot stand. And then Construct is actually just more of a beater in this deck, but a great one because it can beat over pretty much anything. And then the dumping effect, dump that beast, draw a card, it's just more value. And you can hard make this with Invocation, actually, if you just happen to have, like, one of your, like, let's say you have your, like, a Maximus you don't need in your hand and the Squamata or something like that, you can just hard make that. So I think that's pretty good. And then with the Invoked stuff, we've got the 2 Makaba, which is standard, the Purgatrio, which is standard but also really, really powerful. And this almost won me one of my Dragon Link games because he had an Ash Blossom I could banish off of Invocation to make this with. And then the one Ogoides, which is extremely strong as well. I really like that it pops on summon and then it, gains a bunch of attack or whatever. And you always have a target for this because you're able to banish from graveyard with Invocation. You have a bunch of fusions you just dumped off of, like, Maximus and Nadir Servant to get all those effects off. So your graveyard is already loaded up with fusions for this. So you're never sacrificing a body on the field to make this. It's just great. The side deck is, again, pretty standard for what I've been playing this format, although I may change a couple things. So we do have some hand trap replacements, which is Nibiru and Token Collector. I side these in for the Adventure Dragon Link deck, and they didn't really come up. I actually put in Dark Ruler no more because I wanted to shut off some of these invincible combo boards. It did come up against one of the Dragon Link players. I activated it, shut off his board, did a little bit of playing, but I was like 1 card short of being able to actually break his board. So it was a little bit more back and forth there before that match was decided. Lancia as well. Never sided this. It was kind of anti-synergistic. I may actually consider dropping this because I would have rather had Droll, I think. I think Droll would have actually been way better against those Therion Punk, Dragon Link, Adventure, pile ridiculousness decks. And then the last thing is just some back row hates, 3 twins. I usually try to make room for a Feather Duster in the main in a lot of these decks, and I didn't do it with this because we wanted to keep it a super low card count, and I was thinking about dropping the Squamata anyway, so I just didn't want to make another main deck slot. The Plunder player sided anti-spell against me too, which I was legitimately kind of frustrated by that. I was not expecting that at all, and that really caught me off guard. And I almost scooped when he activated it, but I continued to play through it a little bit more because he couldn't kill me either off of that. So it was what it was, but it was pretty cool. So yeah, with that out of the way, sorry if this was a little bit more boring than a lot of the other deck profiles that I do, but I had a lot of fun with this deck. It performed extremely well for my first time really playing it. I think that there is a lot more nuance to it than people give it credit for. People think that this deck is the most brain-dead, easy-to-play deck that you could possibly play right now. But while it was easy and it was easy to understand a lot of the interactions with my opponent, that can sometimes be a benefit. Playing an easy deck is not a bad thing at all because it allows you to focus more on reading your opponent and reading what your opponent may have and making good decisions with your effect activations, as opposed to trying to understand how to do your own combo, which surprisingly is not a problem I ran into with the DDD deck, because that deck I piloted it rather well. But this deck is just inherently kind of easy to play, although I did misplay twice, actually. Like I said, I forgot to add Fleur de Lis during one match, and then I sent the wrong card off of Nadir's Servant, and so I had to actually banish App Cologne to do something else, and I didn't have the ability to get Winda out because I didn't have the Shadal engrave anymore. So I did misplay twice with this, but it wasn't all that detrimental. But yeah, had a really good time with this, and thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys next time. I do have a couple other deck profiles coming up. I remade Goki finally, and there's a Dragoonity list I'm really excited about trying, and I think is actually going to be pretty good. So I'll see you guys next time.